Last week, we had a great show here on God and Country. We discussed and talked about how the left has declared war upon the minds and hearts of our children. They're doing everything they can in their power to try to brainwash our children into thinking certain things are okay, such as having drag queens come in and talk to them at a library, or certain books that are being read in some of these schools. Today, we're going to transition. We're going to talk about how the left has declared war on the Constitution. I am so thankful for the Constitution. Reed, thanks for being with me today. Man, what a great conversation we had last week. I have been looking forward to our conversation today. How's your week been?
It's been pretty intense. The Midnight Ride, just like last week, it's keeping me pretty busy, but we're making some headway. We have a few more cartoons in production, a few more big developments on the way that I have to be kind of quiet about for now, but things are great. How about you?
Man, we had a good week. Good week at church. We got a lot of remodel and some extension going on at our church, and so that's been exciting. We're trying to double the seating, in our auditorium. A lot of people want to say that, people today don't want to hear truth, and so you have to compromise truth in order to get a crowd, but I find that to be the exact opposite. I believe people are yearning. People are wanting to hear the truth. In today's world, we lack a lot of truth. Whether you're scrolling on X or you're scrolling on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or any social media platform, it's hard to find truth. And that's the same in a lot of churches. In a lot of churches, it's becoming more like a nightclub, than it is a church, to where you go and it's more like a production play instead of a church. And so people say, well, if you don't change, if you don't compromise some of those core beliefs and some of those things and bring the church, up to date as far as strobe lights and make it more of a nightclub atmosphere where you're not going to have a big crowd. Well, at Community Baptist Church, we're not a large church, we're a small church, but we're having to double our auditorium size, and we're having to double the amount of Sunday school space that we have, and we're having to double the amount of bathroom space that we have, and we need to add parking. God's been good to us, and I believe it is because of truth. And whenever you think about God and Country show, one thing that I want us to stay zero in on is the truth, is just speak truth. And I believe last week, we were right on. And then I believe that today we're going to come back and we're going to hit that truth. Keep it about truth. We don't have to lie. We don't have to, as the left always does, or misrepresent. We could just speak truth. And so I've been really looking forward to today's, episode, really just talking about how the left has declared war. They want to change the Constitution. They want to rewrite the Constitution in a bad way. They want to amend the Constitution in a bad way. And so I'm looking forward to today's show. But outside of that, man, we had a great weekend, and I'm looking forward to this week as well. And of course, I'm looking forward to what we're discussing and talking about today. Let me ask you this question of, what is that you have beside you?
I'm not really sure. I think this is what's called an AR-15. Is that correct?
It is.
Awesome. Well, I can't promise that I'm going to want to put it down. I thought the rest of this show. But got to keep the trigger discipline. Don't want to be firing any rounds. Given the shirt, I was wearing this shirt today. Saw maybe unregistered firearm object, something like that. But I thought no, ATF, please don't come. Do anything to Dan's house or to my house for that matter. We promise all the weapons are registered and whatnot. But you have something next to you too. Is that right?
I do. So this here, it is not an AR-15. But this is probably my favorite gun that I have. And it's actually, it shoots. It's a 12-gauge shotgun. And it's got a big, clip. And of course, that's where the shotgun shells go. And, one of my best friends, his name was John Stanford. And if you go on my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of me holding this gun. And John is holding his. And John, he served in the military, the United States Air Force for 20 years. And he retired Air Force, and right before he retired, he found out he had cancer. And it was a very rough couple of years for him. And he passed away. And one of the last times that he came down to the coast, he and I went to Dad's Super Pond. It's a gun store here in Gulfport, and we both I bought this one, he bought one just like it. And there's a picture on my Facebook page of me and John standing right here, standing in my living room. And I'm holding mine and he's holding his. I have never shot that gun. I've never
Really?
shot it. I have
I
never.
was going to ask you if it had a lot of kick to it, but you don't know.
No, I've never shot it. Now that one, yeah, I've shot it a few times.
Yeah.
And may or may not have killed some pigs with it. And so, and the deer that are hanging on my wall, I shot those with my 308. But that gun I've never shot, and I probably never will shoot it. It's one of those guns that holds a very strong place in my heart.
How many vegans' heads just exploded? Or do we even have any vegans watching our show?
I doubt we have any. If they are watching, they're watching just to get on here and to troll us. And if you are watching, God bless you. And I pray that you have a great day. And I love DeSantis where he outlawed that meat in
The
Florida.
synthetic meat, right?
Yeah.
That was amazing.
So I used to, and we're about to get some more cows. So we have a little bit of property out here, and we like to raise cows. And we had several cows, and we named our cows. So like we had T-bone, and we had ribeye. Those were our cows. And so whenever we sent our cows to heaven, and whenever they went to cow heaven, and so we were grilling steaks, and we told my little girl, you're eating some, that's T-bone. And she knew that, and so she began to cry, and she had a rough dinner. So, but anyway, it was good. It was good stuff. Looking at these guns, we're talking about the war on the Constitution. I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think that somewhere in the Constitution it talks about guns. Does it?
Oh, does it really? I had no idea.
I think it's in there somewhere. And it's a very priority. It's an amazing thing. Here's what people need to realize.
It's almost like it would be like the first or the second part of the Constitution, somewhere like that, right?
So, yes, I think so. I think you're right. And so why do you suppose that is so high in the Constitution? I mean, whenever you look at, the Constitution, why do you think the first one deals with our speech? And then the second goes right into, all right, free speech is, that is a right that everyone should have. And then it goes right into the second thing. It goes right into your guns, which, in my opinion, and here's just my opinion, you tell me what you think. Of course, we were just fleeing a tyrannical government where we would say we're going to declare our independence as one nation under God, according to our Pledge of the Allegiance. And so, and our founding father said, we're going to have our declaration, and we're going to have our Constitution. And the first one was, you have freedom of speech. You have freedom to say whatever it is that you want to say. You have the freedom of religion. And then it says, okay, now to protect your freedom of speech, you have also the right to bear arms. And so I believe that was so important for our founding fathers because of what was just happening, what was taking place as far as leaving one country, forming another country, and they wanted this country to be free. They want a man and woman to be able to live and to be free. And I say this to many people. They want to talk about how, well, the Constitution wasn't written for you to have AR-15s or shotguns or anything like that. Well, what you have to understand is that whenever they wrote the Constitution, and they didn't write it for hunters. They didn't write it.
It wasn't for duck hunting.
It wasn't for duck hunting.
It's not for shooting deer. It's for shooting tyrants.
It was. Yeah, that's right. It wasn't for squirrel hunting, and so it was for. You're right. It was because we were fleeing a tyrannical government. And so they said, listen, in order to remain free, we need freedom. Freedom of speech. Like I had the freedom of speech. I had the freedom to get on here and to talk about things that we want to talk about. But then I also had the freedom and right to bear arms. And I'll just take it a step further. That I believe that I should be able to own whatever gun I want to own. And these guns that we have held, they may or may not be mine. And so they may or may not be here if you were to come and look. But my point is, I believe that the left wants to take our guns. They want to ban them. They want to do more than just take away, the AR-15. They want to try to call it an assault rifle. Well, that's not what the AR-15 stands for, first off. But they want to try to take every single gun away. And the reason is because if they could take your gun, they control your voice. And that's what they want at the end of the day. Take your gun, control your voice. You have your gun, you control your voice. They have your gun, they control your voice. What's your thoughts?
So, I mean, as always, you hit the nail on the head. I do have to play a little bit of devil's advocate from an historical perspective. There was actually another amendment that was initially proposed for the First Amendment. So what we call the First Amendment today, guaranteeing like the right to free speech, the freedom of religion, freedom to peaceably assemble, that wasn't initially our First Amendment. And what's today our Second Amendment? the right to bear arms was initially like our third or fourth. But to your point, your real overall point here, the reason why these liberties were placed towards the front of the Bill of Rights was because they are to be priorities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was because they are to be paramount, right? Because there's actually a pretty good quote from Dave Chappelle, of all people, where he talks about the right to bear arms. You've probably seen it before. He says we have the Second Amendment just in case the first one doesn't work out.
So I may or may not watch Dave Chappelle.
Really?
May or may not.
What? You're going to plead the fifth to decide another constitutional amendment, right?
That's right.
Well, I think that he hit the nail on the head, just as you often do, with respect to the importance of the Second Amendment and overall the right to bear arms. But I was talking with you a little bit, like before we got started here, about how, being an historian, I think it's pretty interesting to think about where the idea of the right to bear arms and really, the right to free speech came from. So, like I told you before we got started with the show here, right at 100 years before we had the American Constitution, right before our Constitution was ratified, the Constitution of 1789, there was the English Bill of Rights. There was the English Constitution that was ratified in our mother country, in England, right? So whenever all of the brilliant men, all the founding fathers were gathered together, the founders and the framers of our current form of government, they were reflecting upon different models of civilization, both ancient and modern. They were pulling from the lessons of history. They were drawing wisdom from the centuries past, trying to understand, okay, what is this perfect calibration that we can strike between liberty and between government control? Because they understood government is a necessary evil. It's evil, but it's also, the necessary part's pretty important too. So what is that magical calibration that we can walk between liberty and government, right? And obviously, perhaps the government they were reflecting upon most of all was the English government throughout the 100 years prior to the point where we declared independence from Great Britain in 1776. So I'll make this very simple. I'll keep this all very brief because I want to distill this down so that our audience can remember it pretty easily. Maybe whip it out whenever they have their next Thanksgiving dinner. Like they can impress some of their relatives with some of this knowledge, right? And I see you're kind of like looking at my shirt while I'm talking about all this. Dad Carr's probably wondering, who is this guy talking to me about English history next to an AR-15 with UFOs all over his shirt in my house, right? So like I said, reflecting on the 100 years, exactly 100 years before our Constitution was ratified in 1689, there was the English Constitution that was ratified. And it followed an English Civil War that had taken place, and it was largely a religious war. Going all the way back to Henry VIII in the early 16th century. Everybody seems to know about Henry VIII. He had his 6 wives, divorced 2 of them, beheaded 2 of them, blah, 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 right? So starting with Henry VIII and going all the way to 1689, there had been a sort of Game of Thrones that had been played in England where you had Puritans and Anglicans and Catholics competing for the throne, one after the other, right? So you had Queen Mary, they call her Bloody Mary, right? She was, she was one of the Catholic monarchs. She was persecuting Puritans, persecuting Anglicans. You had the same thing going from every direction for several years at a time. There would be a different monarch of a different religious denomination using the throne as a weapon against people of other faiths, people of other denominations, right? So that was happening from Henry VIII all the way until 1689. So for between 150 to 200 years, there was just incredible religious strife happening in our mother country of England. Finally, the English people overthrew King James II, who is a Catholic monarch, and this is where we get the origin of the idea of the right to bear arms. Like I said, there was in the English Constitution of 1689, there was a provision. It was an actual right enshrined in that Constitution that was called the right to bear arms, and what that guaranteed was the right of Protestants in that country to keep and bear arms. Now, whenever that phrase, right to bear arms, that basic idea was translated over to our form of government, what that meant was that everybody had the right to bear arms. So relevant to God and country, when we talk about the right to bear arms, it's actually something that is inextricably linked to religious liberty whenever we look at it from an historical perspective.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I love that bit of history. Whenever you look at freedoms that we have that we believe are so important here in America, that a lot of countries don't have. You mentioned freedom, talking about religious freedom. Look, there's a lot of countries. I have a friend of mine, matter of fact, he just got back from the Middle East. He was over in the Middle East for like 14 or 15 days, him and his mom and dad. And there is no religious liberty in Iraq. There is no religious liberty in Iran. I was watching some videos coming out of Ukraine and how they was beating people because of they was Orthodox Catholic, and they were beating some of these Orthodox Catholics because they were trying to worship God in their way. I'm not a Catholic, but I'm a Baptist. But listen, if you're a Catholic, you should be able to worship God however you see fit. No religious organization should come in and tell anyone how they can or how they should worship God. I have friends that are Pentecostal. I have friends that are Catholic. I have friends that are Presbyterian, that are Methodist, and now they're leaving the Methodist Church. And which I would be. I'm a Baptist for a reason, but I mean they're leaving the Methodist Church because the Methodists are just going way too woke and adopting some of this transgender filth that's trying to sweep in and take over our nation. And so, but no organization has the right. I believe it was Maine. I could be wrong, but I believe it was Maine. They wanted to adopt Baptists to be their state religion. And the Baptist leaders of that day said, no, we do not want the Baptists to be the state religion, because we believe that people should be able to be whatever religion. We're fleeing that. We're getting away from that. We don't want no government telling us how we can or can't worship God. If we want to be a Baptist, we'll be a Baptist. If we want to be non-denominational, we'll be non-denominational. We have that right to choose. And we have that right as an American. And whenever you look at some of these countries like Iraq, they don't enjoy that freedom that we get to have. Even in Turkey, Georgia, Iran, North Korea especially, Russia. I mean, a lot of these countries, the nation of Israel, go to Israel and try to preach Christ. You're going to have a rude awakening. Now, Israel is not a Christian nation. Now, I believe that we as a country should support and back Israel, but Israel is not a Christian nation. They do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. I mean, they crucified Jesus. They put Jesus on a cross. And so, and I know technically speaking, let me back up because I don't want to get shot, because I know we got some people that, technically speaking, I know that it was my sin that put Jesus on the cross. And according to Ephesians, I know that the reason why Jesus went to the cross was because of the blood. And that is where you get the forgiveness of your sin, according to Hebrews 9. It's that shedding of blood. It's for the remission of your sin. That word remission means forgiveness. And so I get it, that it was my sin that put Jesus on the cross. But historically speaking, Jesus was not crucified in Mississippi. He was crucified in Israel. And he was crucified over in that country. And so Israel is not a Christian nation. And so you go to Israel and try to start a church, you're going to get run out of the country. And I know because we may or may not support missionaries in Israel. And so you cannot just go door to door like we go here. You cannot just worship God freely like we do here. And that's what really sets our country apart than a lot of countries, is that not just our religious liberty, right, that we have here in America, but whenever you look at all of the different religions in our country, it's not like that in most other countries. Most of the countries, whenever you look at religion, you'll see 97% Muslim, 0.2% Christian. You'll see 98, I think Turkey is 99.4% Muslim, 0.1% Christian. I mean, North Korea is 100% whatever they are. Russia is atheist country, like 90-something% atheist. And so whenever you begin to look at these countries, they don't have, here we have a broad band of different religions. And this is just Dan's personal opinion here. It goes back to, because we have the Constitution, we have the First Amendment, and we have that Second Amendment. And that Second Amendment, in my opinion, protects all others whenever you have that right to bear arms. And so whenever you look at religious liberty, that is the most important liberty that a man can have, is to worship God how he sees fit. Now, do I believe, according to my Bible, that there's a right way and a wrong way? That's what I believe, yes. Do I believe that there is one way to heaven? And is it through religion? No, I do not believe you go to heaven through religion or through a church. And I'm not trying to get too preachy, but you go to heaven through Jesus Christ. That is the only way. There's not 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 ways like a lot of people want to make out to be. It is through Jesus. And that is what every religion, every church better get nailed down. that it's not through my Baptist church, but it is through Christ. And so whenever you look at the Constitution, the reason why they want to get rid of the Constitution, ultimately, it is because they want to take your voice. And the voice of what? This is Dan's opinion. They're trying to take away that voice of Christianity. They're trying to take away that voice of Jesus. That is why they go after in our public schools. A lot of times whenever it comes to our children, that's why in the very early stages of their curriculum, what is the thing that they begin to attack? The first thing they begin to attack. I'll tell you what it is. It is creation. They go after creation. And they say, well, we're here from a big bang, right? Over billions of years, this earth formed and evolution happened. But I guess evolution stopped about 7,000 years ago. But my point is simply, they want to take that voice away. Why? Because they're after the message of Jesus. They've always been after the message of Jesus. That's what they're going after. And so that's why I believe the Constitution is so important, is because it protects the gospel. It protects the gospel. Now, that brings me to this. In the book of Acts, whenever the church was being persecuted, at that time, the church was flourishing more than any other time. I mean, the church was on fire. People want to try to, they want to say, well, you cut me off anytime because I know there's so much here that I could talk about. But whenever you look at the Great Commission, a lot of people want to act like the Great Commission was given to the church, but the Great Commission wasn't given to the church. The ministry of reconciliation was given to the church. But as far as the Great Commission that is in the book of Acts that people want to talk about, that was given to the church. No, that was given to a specific group of people. That was given to the disciples. They was given the Great Commission. And in Acts chapter number 2, the Great Commission was fulfilled. Whenever Peter got up and Peter preached in Acts chapter number 2, and those cloven tongues of fire came down, if you look in the book of Acts, there was, and it mentions all of the different nations that was there. There was like 20-something different nations that was represented. And so whenever Peter began to preach, those cloven tongues of fire, and my Pentecostal friends are going to get mad at me here, but that cloven tongues of fire was not Peter speaking in an unknown language or an unknown tongue. Peter was preaching. The Holy Spirit come down in those cloven tongues of fire, took that message, and the Bible says that every single man there heard in their own language. That's why they said, is Peter drunk? I mean, what's happening here? I mean, these men are not well-educated men. How do they know all these different religions? How was this happening? It was because of the Holy Spirit. And so, but the Great Commission was given to those men, and in my opinion, they fulfilled the Great Commission in Acts chapter number 2. But it goes back to the Constitution. I got to get back to the Constitution. Back to the Constitution. They want to take away that freedom of speech because they want to alienate, or they want to stop. They want to put out the fire of the gospel. And if they can do that, then they are doing the message that Satan himself has. And that is getting rid of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that's ultimately what they're after. And that this nation was built upon the gospel. This nation was built upon the Bible. When you read the Constitution, there's like 27 different biblical principles that is in the Constitution. And the reason was because most of these men were men of faith. These are men that pray. These are men that got with God. And so it's so important that we understand, why are they after the Constitution? Why are they after it? They want your voice. They want your voice. That's what they're after. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to you because I will talk for the next 45 minutes about this one particular thing as far as the gospel and as far as getting out that gospel message. And if they can stop it, man, they will stop it. And I'm saying all that to say this. Go to Iraq today and start talking about Jesus and see what happens.
Well, I think I know exactly, what the outcome was going to be. A lot of good stuff there. I'll say that I think that, the idea of religious liberty, being able to have different, denominations, different, faiths, within this country, I think that, this about to be exemplified here. Because like when it comes to evolution, for example, I might see it a little bit differently than you. I think that when it comes to evolution, here's how I've thought about it. And maybe this is totally wrong. Maybe you would set me straight. To me, science is the study of God's creation. And just coming from a scientific background, so I also studied geology in my academic career, in addition to history, and there was some anthropology mixed in there as well. I guess I always wondered why we could, obviously believe in God, understand, the truth of God's revelation, while treating science as though it's the attempted understanding as to the how, like the mechanics behind God's creation. How did God create it, right? So whenever I think of evolution, I don't necessarily see something that is contradictory to Scripture. I see them as It's things that can work together. Now, is evolution used as a weapon by atheists and agnostics in science against Christianity? Absolutely it is. I think there's a very real agenda within what we call the scientific community to discredit, to alienate Christianity, to make people feel stupid for having faith. I saw that for many, many years, just on account of the work that I've done. So, like I said, when it comes to evolution, I think maybe there's room for disagreement between, the two of us. I'm not really sure. North Korea is a very interesting example that I wanted to touch on because you brought up North Korea, I think, 2 times there. There's a sort of grotesque inversion of the Trinity that I think is present in what we might call the North Korean state religion. So in North Korea, they have an official religion that you must abide by, and the costs of not doing so are about as severe as you can imagine. Use your imagination. So, as most people know now, Kim Jong-un, he's the current, dear leader of North Korea. But prior to him, there was Kim Jong-il, and prior to him, there was the grandfather, Kim Jong-sun, right? And what the North Korean, we'll call the state religion, teaches is that Kim Jong-sun, the grandfather, is leader in perpetuity. They actually believe that he is serving as president still from the grave. Same thing with Kim Jong-il, is that they have a sort of strange idea of immortality surrounding their previous leaders, right? So you have the grandfather, the father, and the son all leading the country together according to their belief system. It's a sort of grotesque inversion of the Trinity that I can't help but think is somewhat fitting for such a tyrannical far left sort of regime, right? I also wanted to go back to another very interesting point about how religious liberty impacted our early country in a way that almost nobody knows. So prior to 1797, about 1/5 of our young country's federal budget, about 1/5 of our young country's federal budget was actually spent paying off, bribing, paying extortion to the Barbary pirate governments of North Africa. So during that period, you had 4 governments ruling across North Africa, right? And they had Barbary pirates, corsairs that were roaming the Eastern Atlantic, the Mediterranean, abducting Europeans from their villages, selling them into slavery. Very, very bad business for our early country in a way that I'll get into here in just a second. So you had Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and Morocco. These were four emirates, so to speak, that were established across North Africa at that time. And the Barbary pirates were so out of control that they were terrorizing Europe. So the Mediterranean Sea was ruled by the Barbary Muslim pirates. Same thing with the Eastern Mediterranean. The reason why this was such a big problem for our country in our first years as a country independent from Great Britain was because we needed to be able to trade in the Mediterranean, particularly dried cod from the Northeast. We had to be able to trade that in the Mediterranean. And the Barbary pirates of the Eastern Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea were making this virtually impossible for us. So prior to that point, in order to try and maintain trade and safe travel for American travelers across the Atlantic going back and forth to Europe, we were paying as much as 1/5 of our early country's federal budget to what you call the Deys, DEY, or the regional governors of different Islamic governments that were appointed by the Ottoman Sultan there in Istanbul, formerly Constantinople. So this actually became a very big issue because Jefferson, the great non-interventionist, the great libertarian, early and third president of the United States, actually went to war with the Barbary pirates. This is a bit of our early history that's a little bit more well known, but there were a lot of really terrible things that happened to our country there in the first 10, 15 years of our country's history because of differences in religion, primarily between, the young United States, which was not an officially Christian country, but was a Christian country in spirit, so to speak, and the Islamic world, which was making our independence a very, very difficult sort of venture. There was the terrible thing that happened in the year 1800 where one of our ships, the USS George Washington, it was a large frigate, one of the first ships our country had ever built. It was being captained by a veteran sailor named William Bainbridge. So he had served in the American Revolution, and I believe he had served in the 7 Years' War before that, but don't quote me. He was commissioned by then President John Adams. This was still whenever John Adams was president, if I'm not mistaken, to deliver ransom money from the United States to the day DEY, or regional governor of Tripoli. Whenever Bainbridge arrived, he made the long sail all the way from the United States to Tripoli, which is in modern-day Libya. Quite a long journey, carrying, a substantial sum of money that we were basically paying, that our taxpayers in our early country were paying, just to keep from getting raided, to keep from getting our soldiers, our sailors sold into slavery. What the regional governor of Tripoli did was, he said, no, actually, because you brought me ransom money, you American sailors who traveled all the way across the Atlantic to bring me this ransom money, because you pay me ransom money, you are my slaves. And because you are my slaves, I'm going to make you take the American flag down from your ship, and I'm going to make you deliver a series of presents that I have to the Sultan. So what happened was the regional governor of Tripoli made the USS George Washington, this was, our second president in, the USS George Washington, take the American flag down, put the Algerian flag up, and sail that ship across the Mediterranean to the city of Istanbul to deliver cargo to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. This was an enormous insult to the American people, and it did result in actually one of our very first wars. So this is between the War for Independence and the War of 1812. We went to war, very short-lived war, under the Jefferson presidency with some of the Islamic rulers of North Africa, and then again for a very short period of time under President James Madison.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back! The My Pillow guy!
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The My Pillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last My Pillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. My Pillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new My Pillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature-regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit MyPillow.com.
Yeah, these are known as the Barbarian Wars. And I've got a good friend of mine that has some really good DVD information, some good information on DVDs about these Barbarian Wars and the impact, that they had. You would think that we would have learned over the last couple hundred years of our young nation when it comes to dealing with these Islamic countries like Iran. And, what makes us think if it didn't work then, what makes us think it's going to work today? Where we put loads of cash on a plane and fly to Iran. And we're like, okay, Iran, we're going to give you all this cash, and I want you to be good little boys and good little girls. It didn't happen then, and it's not going to happen now. And so we should never be giving any of these people any of our money. And so, because it's all taxpayer money. whenever you look at it, going back to bringing, those countries money. And then even today, in the last 20 years where we ship, or the last months where we ship millions of dollars to some of these countries that are being controlled by, some of these different terrorist Islamic organizations. And so it's never going to help. You mentioned Thomas Jefferson. And I know Thomas Jefferson was not directly involved in writing, the Constitution. He was in France at the time. But I like one thing that he said. And he said this, and it's so good. He said, "I consider the foundation of the Constitution as laid on this ground, that all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people." And so one thing that Thomas Jefferson understood was the power of the people, that it goes back to the people. And if the people rise up, the federal government, they have no power. And the Constitution was not written. And here's what people need to understand. The Constitution was not written so that the government can maintain power. The Constitution was written so that the people can understand their power. And it's them that controls the government, and it's not the government that controls the people. And so that's why Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that's why she wanted to rewrite the Constitution, or she said this, that if she could draft the Constitution today, that she would take the Constitution from South Africa. That's what she would do. And so, of course, whenever you have someone that wants to hold on to that power, somebody that doesn't want the power to belong to the people, of course, that's what she would want. And so, but it goes back to, that individual people, that just rise up and understand the power of the Constitution and why it's there and why the left is attacking it so much. And so very, very good points that you bring up. I've got this book, and I recommend it for every American. To read this book. It's called I Pledge Allegiance, and it's about the flag. And this book, when I opened it up, I forgot that I had it, and it's on my shelf. When I opened it up, it's got Mary Crane signature, and it's got G.S. Crane signature. And they gave me this book. G.S. Crane and Mary Crane. They gave me this book. G.S. Crane was Jackie's grandpa, and he was on the USS Annapolis. Back in World War II, whenever the USS Annapolis, it brought the atomic bombs that was dropped in Japan. It brought them over to some Pacific islands, and on the way back, there was a Japanese submarine that torpedoed the USS Annapolis and sunk it in a matter of minutes. Over 800 men and women Navy lost their lives. G.S. Crane, he was a Christian, and he asked the captain if him and some of his friends could sit on the top deck and they could have a Bible study. And they would sleep in hammocks, or they would sleep on the top deck, and they were up there having a Bible study whenever that torpedo hit. And that's why they lived. But for 5 days, he sat in the Pacific Ocean. For 5 days, he lost his arm. And from the entire time that I knew him, he did not have an arm on his right hand, a right arm. It was a fake arm. But in that water, he surrendered his life to the Lord, and he surrendered to preach, and he started a bunch of churches, all over the South, and had just a great testimony. And so I said that because whenever I opened up this book, I saw that. But I want to read this to you. This is so good. And this is what I want people to understand. It says, I pledge allegiance. I. The call to commitment is an extremely radical, very personal call to rally around the cause of freedom, to consciously individuate my commitment at the very core of my identity. I. A very personal pronoun. Not we, not you, not they, but I. I is in the first person singular. And how appropriate that the first word in the pledge of commitment that I recite to my country, to my flag, is in the first person singular. The first person I must consider in honoring this country's legacy of faith and freedom is me. I am singularly responsible for my contribution to our integrity and dignity. I alone am accountable for my participation in our heritage of hope and prosperity. It's whenever I stand and I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I. It starts individually with individual people. And when it comes to the Constitution, it starts with I. So many times we want to look to D.C. or we want to look to wherever. And we think that it's somebody else's responsibility to stand for the Constitution. It's somebody else's responsibility to fight for what we believe in. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not anyone else's responsibility but yours and mine to say, you know what, I'm going to do all that I can to protect the Constitution at all costs. So I want to encourage you a couple of things. First, I want to encourage you to get to know the Constitution, right? I mean, let me ask you this question. Have you ever read the Constitution?
Yes.
I knew that. I knew that was going to be the answer. But whenever it comes to read the Constitution, get to know the Constitution. Get to know the founding fathers of the Constitution, those men that wrote the Constitution. I mean, get to know them. And were they perfect? No. Did they make mistakes? Yeah. Yes. I mean, we all make mistakes, do we not? We're human. And that's part of that human error. But you and I are to do everything that we can to protect the Constitution. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that the Constitution is under attack?
Yes. I think there's very little question as to that.
What do you think the end game is? Like, why are they coming after the Constitution?
Because the Constitution is the last legal bulwark, the ultimate legal bulwark standing between us and their Soviet-style Marxist tyranny that they've imagined for us. I think it's quite literally that simple.
So James Madison said this. He was often referred to, obviously, as the father of the Constitution. Now, he said this. He said the Constitution is the guide. I like that word, guide. He said the Constitution is the guide from which I will never abandon. So what he was saying was this, that the Constitution is going to be my guide. Guide for what? Guide to lead this nation. The guide for my country. The guide for, is the Constitution my spiritual guide? No, my Bible is. But my Constitution is my guide as a countryman. It's my guide as an American. It's my guide as a citizen of this great nation. And you're right. It is the last standing. They want to destroy it. Because if they can destroy it, they can guide you. And what road is it that they want to guide you down? James Madison said, it's my guide. What's the first? Freedom of speech. They want to control not just what you say, but most importantly, they want to control what you hear. It's not just about controlling your speech, but they want to control what you hear. Because if they can control what you hear, then they can control you. What was one of the first things that Adolf Hitler wanted to control in his country?
It was the press.
The press. If you could control the press, guess what you control?
Well, you can control the ideas that people have informing them, right? And
Absolutely.
to do that, you control the way people think. If you can control speech, you can control what people say, then you can control what other people hear. You control what they hear, you can direct their thoughts, right?
You control everything about them.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the left and they're coming after the
You're governing far too many things about that person's life than you ought to be doing.
Absolutely. And so when you look at the left and they're coming after the Constitution, a lot of people want to say, well, they want to take away your speech. And I would agree. But they also want to take away what you hear. And so that's so important that we understand that they are coming after that. And James Madison said, the Constitution is a guide which I never will abandon. And so you and I as Americans, first of all, we can't abandon the Constitution. But secondly, we need to make sure this nation doesn't abandon it. We need to make sure this nation stays right on course because the left wants to control everything that you hear. A while ago, you was talking about evolution and talking about, evolution and creation. That goes back to the freedom of speech, and that goes back to the freedom of you having your right to believe what it is that you want to believe, and I have the right to believe what I want to believe. And then on this God and Country podcast, you talk about what you want to talk about. I talk about what I want to talk about. And we can disagree, and that's fine. It's fine to have disagreements. The problem comes in is whenever I try to get mad at you or I try to control your speech on this show, and we're talking about the Constitution. And I'm like, look, man, if you don't agree with me on how God created the heavens and the earth, then you can't say that on this show. You got to keep your opinion to yourself. Now, how would you like me to say that?
Well, I think that would go about as well as the Civil War over at the Daily Wire did between Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens, right?
Oh, is that what happened? Somebody was trying to control what somebody was saying?
Well, that's Candace Owens' claim, is that Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring, and I don't know how accurate it is. To me, in my opinion, there are always two sides to a story. But that's the general ideas that Candace Owen said, that Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring, and maybe others at the Daily Wire were attempting to silence her about the issue of Israel specifically. And my view on how we do things at the Midnight Riot is that, within conservatism, within patriotism, there ought to be room for certain amounts of disagreement, right? I mean, everybody knows that I'm crazy about Ron Paul, and I come from the Ron Paul tradition, also pro-Trump, and we have some spokespeople for the company who are a little bit different than that. And that's actually, I hate to say that diversity is our strength. Saying that jokingly makes you want to gag a little bit, right?
Well, look, I tell my wife this all the time. I tell her, I say, baby, you have every right to believe what you want to believe. And you have every right to say what you want to say. And you also have every right to be wrong. And so...
But to your point, though, like if you wanted to, run to your congressman, run to our congressman and say, hey, I don't like what Reed Cooley said about whatever other kind of issue, and have me, imprisoned for it, that's obviously where things have,
yeah, that's wrong.
Gone much too far.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's been the reality for most of human history. So when we talk about the Constitution and we talk about, the liberties that it gave birth to, right, or at the very least that it protected, the natural rights that were enshrined as political rights in the Constitution and translated over into liberties, which we enjoy, this is such a deviation from the norm of history. It is so crazy, like how less than 1% of 1% of 1% of people who have ever lived throughout history get to enjoy the kinds of liberties, such as our religious liberties or our freedom of speech or our right to bear arms, that we do today. Tyranny, right? Appealing to some sort of higher authority to censor or shut down or persecute or imprison or execute people with whom you disagree. That's been the norm for almost all of history, and it's really the norm for the majority of the world today. So when we talk about lunatics, like people on the left, and not just people on the left, we talk about lunatics who want to shut down the Constitution or want to overwrite the Constitution. They want to obliterate the Constitution, right? People like the Ruth Bader Ginsburgs, who don't necessarily want to get rid of the Constitution in her case, but she thinks for some stupid reason that the South African Constitution is somehow better. These people don't understand just how good they have it. They don't understand just how unique liberty is. Liberty is a pretty young idea. When we talk about liberty in the span of human history, freedom is a young idea. And to me, it would be such a tragedy to see us give up on the idea of freedom whenever it's so young.
Yeah, I agree. I like what John Jay said. John Jay said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country, and to teach, this is important, and teach the rising generation to be free. One reason why I believe that we have a lot of, like you look at what's happening in a lot of our college universities. Well, I'm going to say something very controversial here, and I might get us in trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's what I believe. I believe a lot of those kids are a bunch of spoiled, rotten brats who spent too much time and time out as a kid, and they didn't get enough spankings. It was a mom and daddy that should have got a rod out and gave a spanking to some of these kids whenever they were 5 and 6 years old, running around their house hollering and screaming, for their whatever it is that they're hollering and screaming for, or throwing a temper tantrum in some Walmart somewhere or Kmart because their mom or dad's not going to buy them, that candy bar. So they're going to throw a fit, holler and scream until they get their way. And that's what's happening to a lot of these college campuses, where you got a bunch of these young, spoiled, rotten brats. They want everything free. They want everybody to give them something, and they want you to shut up and listen to them. And you better not disagree with them, because if you do, then you're some racist, some bigot racist because you disagree with them, which is crazy, insane. All because I disagree, what some lunatic on the left, doesn't make me a racist. And I'll just say this, there's some people that's on that far right, that, boy, and this will get me in trouble too, that are they have just as many lunatic ideas on the far, far right as some of these people do on the far, far left.
Luckily, though, the people you're talking about on the far, far right don't have the amount of power that the far, far left does. Between the two, the far left is far more powerful.
Listen, it doesn't matter if you're in the ditch on the left side of the road or if you're in the ditch on the right side of the road. You're still in the ditch, and the goal is to stay between the lines. And I believe that those lines are the Constitution. The Constitution will keep you between the lines. It's whenever you get outside of the Constitution on the left, you get in the ditch. It's when you get outside of the Constitution on the right, you get in the ditch. If I'm trying to silence your speech, all because you disagree with me, I'm just as bad as the other person is. That's trying to silence speech because, let me put it like this. I'm pro-life. I'm as pro-life as they come. I don't think that you should ever take the life of an unborn baby. I don't think there's any ever reason that you should murder the life of a child. I mean, I'm pro-life as you can get. Personally, I'm a pro-life advocate. I do all that I can in the pro-life arena. But if you've got someone out there that's for choice, right? They have a right. They have a right to have pro-choice marches. They have that right. They have a right to petition their government. They have that right. I mean, I have a right too to petition, and I have a right too to stand for what I believe in far as in the pro-life arena. But at the same time, I don't have a right to try to shut down somebody else's speech because it's different than mine. Just like they don't have the right to shut down my speech because it's different than theirs. And that goes back to what I said a while ago. If you're in the ditch on the left side of the road, you're still in the ditch. If you're in the ditch on the right side of the road, you're still in the ditch. And the Constitution is what will keep us. Is what will keep us on that. In the road is what the Constitution will do. I like what Thomas Paine said. He said, a Constitution defines and limits the powers of the government it creates. Well, that's good. Whenever you think about, he says that the Constitution, it limits the powers. And I got a question for you. Do you think that in the last 200 years, more importantly, the last 65, 70 years, do you think the government in America has shrunk in size, or do you think that it has grown?
Look, if you're going to build up so much suspense around questions, you got to ask me questions that are a little bit harder than that, okay, Dan?
Well, I mean,
I think we all know.
It's growing. So let me ask this question then. All right, this would be a tough question.
Okay.
Then why is it growing?
Well, it's growing for a number of reasons because we've inculcated a culture, I believe, in this country of dependency on government.
Yeah,
I think that there's an element of cultural rot that's at the heart of it. I also think that the Federal Reserve, like the fact that we have a Federal Reserve which can print off as much money as it wants, subsidize as many things as it wants, that has a lot to do with it. I think that once you abolish the Federal Reserve, it's not an outright checkmate, but it will have the effect, if we can see it in our lifetime, of resolving many of the other governmental and cultural ills that we see today. So we have this awful culture of dependency. And by dependency, I don't just mean people, abusing food stamps and things like that. I also mean corporate welfare. Corporate welfare is a far larger expenditure than what we typically call the welfare system. Right? We have a massive welfare state, a giant bloated nanny state that's been building up ever since FDR, maybe before FDR. Right? We have the Federal Reserve System, which is the chief financier of the American super state that we're talking about, which has grown, so swelled so dramatically over the last 65 to 70 years. That's what I would attribute it to, but I guess I'm wondering if your diagnosis is different.
So it is. So I'm going to go back to that Thomas Paine. And then I want to mention, I'm going to read this statement, and I'm going to ask you another question. It's going to be a tough question.
Okay.
It's going to be a hard question. But you got to listen to this question, or you got to listen to the statement by Thomas Paine. A constitution defines and limits the powers of the government. That's what a constitution does. That's what it does. It limits the powers of government. Supposed to. It therefore follows as a natural and also logical result that the governmental exercise of any power not authorized by the Constitution. Did you understand that? Government exercise of any power not authorized by the Constitution is an assumed power and therefore illegal.
Illegitimate.
So what is our government doing today that's not in the Constitution?
Almost everything it's doing seems to be illegitimate by that metric there. And Thomas Jefferson says, Thomas Jefferson makes many such similar remarks, right? About how when a government exceeds its boundaries, it is the obligation, the responsibility, the right of the people to alter, and if they cannot alter, then to abolish it, right? So
the EPA.
Oh, the EPA, for sure. FBI, absolutely.
CIA.
100%.
What about NASA?
1,000.
What about Homeland Security?
DHS? Oh, absolutely.
What about Social Security Administration?
We could do this all day.
What about the Department of Education? What about the Department of Energy?
Well, yeah, Department of Education, Department of Energy are interesting to me because then Chris McDaniel was talking about this very eloquently on his show a couple of weeks ago. People think that we didn't have an education system prior to Jimmy Carter signing into law the Department of Education, which he did around the same time as the Department of Energy, by the way. That we just didn't discover, petroleum, or that we hadn't discovered coal until we had the Department of Energy, right? People make these assumptions about these government agencies, that these government agencies must be somehow not just relevant, but essential to whatever aspect of life they claim to apply to, right? So every single one of the government agencies,
Food and Drug Administration, Federal Reserve.
Well, technically it's not a government agency, but yes, absolutely 1,000,000,000%.
So let me go back and read this quote by Thomas Paine.
Okay.
Now, after mentioning all those government, we just mentioned 12. I mean, and those are just off. I mean,
it's a drop in the bucket.
So now let's listen to Thomas Paine. A constitution defines and limits the powers of the government it creates. It therefore follows as a natural and also logical result that the governmental exercise of any power not authorized by the Constitution is an assumed power and therefore illegal. That's what Thomas Paine said. So why has government grown so much? Let me tell you why. Let's bring it down on my level. The reason why the government has grown so much in the last 75 years is because we're in the ditch. We are no longer following the Constitution. We are no longer living how our founding fathers created this great nation as far as the foundation principles through the Constitution. That's why this show today is so important. Is because we need people to understand that they declared war on the Constitution long before today. This started a long time ago whenever they started adding all of these governmental agencies. Well, the government must do this. And it goes back to that word that you used a while ago, dependency. They want you dependent upon them. They want you to dependent upon them for food. They want you dependent upon them for water. They want you dependent upon them for protection. They want you dependent upon them for all of these things. Why? Because if you are dependent upon them, they control you. Control. That is what it is. It is control. And at the end of the day, that's what they want. At the end of the day, the left wants to control you. They want to get rid of so much of the Constitution, so that way they can control you and they can control me. And they'll control shows like this. They'll shut it down.
It's going to happen one day, I promise.
Yeah. I mean, do you think Adolf Hitler would allow this show back in his day?
No,
I mean, could you imagine you and I sitting in our living rooms underneath his reign and talking about Adolf Hitler? I mean, they'd kick in our doors and come in here and take over. Absolutely. And so what Thomas Paine...
Good thing we have guns,
That's right. Yeah. I like the American flag on it. I really do. It's, I need to get that one dipped too.
Yeah.
And so it'd be nice. And so I know today we wanted to talk about also the war against Donald Trump. But I knew that this was going to happen today. I thought, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that I think that's a day, because we could talk about this today, next week, the week after, about the war on the Constitution, because there's so much, that we haven't even gotten to, where there's I got 8 things here written down that the left would love to do to the Constitution, because they want control. They want to control everything they can about us. And so whenever it goes back to the Constitution, we must protect it. We must stand for it. If not, they will take over. They will take total 100% control, because at the end of the day, it's like we talked about last week, they are after our children. Our children, I mean, you and I might be the target, but the children are the bullseye. That's what they're after. They want those children. They want to control our children. They want to control their very minds.
What's worse than that, because when you really think about it, they want to destroy our past, they want to destroy our present, and they want to destroy our future. They're erasing our past by altering the pages of history at every turn, altering the way, dictating the way that we can reflect on history. They're destroying our present all around us, and our children are quite literally our future.
Yep, I agree. I like what Patrick Henry said. Last quote from one of I love reading beyond our founding fathers.
He's one of my favorites.
Patrick Henry said, and this goes back to what I said in the very beginning, the Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it come to dominate our lives and interests. And what is happening today? Government is trying to restrain, and government is trying to dominate our lives. Everything about us. They're trying to dominate. They're trying to control. I have this here with me today, sitting up here on my case. And you know what that is?
I can't tell.
That is sand. That is sand. I have some friends of mine, they're in the Marines, and they went to Iwo Jima. And while they were in Iwo Jima, they, look at that. While they were at Iwo Jima, they picked up some sand. And it's that black sand from Iwo Jima. That sand is from Iwo Jima. And I have this sitting up on my shelf. And I look at this sand all the time. I think about this sand often. I have preached a lot of messages using this sand. And it's the sand at Iwo Jima. And every time I see this, I'm reminded of Iwo Jima. I'm reminded of the men and women who gave their lives, those Marines, 7,000 Marines, gave their lives at Iwo Jima. My wife's grandpa, G.S. Crane, was there. He was there with the USS Indianapolis. They were sitting out, and they were shooting in missiles for those Marines and trying to support those Marines. People ask, Dan, why do you shout so much? Why do you make so much noise about some of these things? I'll tell you why. It's because there was some men and women that were willing to sacrifice all so that I could enjoy the freedoms of today. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for our founding fathers. I'm so thankful for our Constitution. I'm so thankful for my Bible and our biblical heritage and our heritage as a country. Did we get it all right in the beginning? No. Are there still some things that we could do better? Yes, I would agree with that. But at the end of the day, there was some men and women who were willing to sacrifice everything for our freedom. And when I look at this sand from Iwo Jima, I'm reminded of those men that gave everything for us so that we can enjoy. So we could talk today about the Constitution. And I don't know about you, but I am so thankful for those men that gave everything. I am so thankful for men and women right now who are willing to sacrifice for our freedoms and for our liberties. So we can sit here and we could talk about the Constitution and we could talk about our guns.
Over your giant jar of a sweet tea.
That's right. Beautiful jar of sweet tea and wear our UFO shirt. And just enjoy life. Why? Because people are willing to sacrifice for us. Any closing remarks before we shut down today?
No, I don't suppose so. I think this has been an absolutely wonderful show. I think that every one of our shows we have are absolutely phenomenal, and I think that they're only getting better. I want to thank our audience for tuning in. Once again, Dan, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, audience, for tuning in. Thanks for sharing. Look, it really helps us. I mean, we can't say that enough when it comes to the platforms, whether it's the website, whether it's on X, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, share the Substack, sharing, getting out our message. Of course, YouTube and some of these social media platforms, they do not like the conservative message. And so they try to turn it down, especially during election years. And this year being an election year, they want to try to turn it down. And so it's important to share. Share on Facebook, share on X, share on YouTube, copy and paste the link, send it to friends, and help us get the message out. Once again, thanks for tuning in. God bless you, and God bless the great United States of America.
Hey guys, it's Reed here. I don't say this about a lot of people, but I have to say Mike Lindell is a real patriot, and we could not be more thankful to him and MyPillow for sponsoring today's episode of God and Country. Remember, go to MyPillow.com and save huge on a great night of sleep by entering the promo code Midnight Ride. Thanks.